It is an absolute honor to be here with all of you today. It's such an exciting forum. I thought I would start us off by sharing a bit about my journey that has taken me from being a college student 22 years ago, a very naive college student, that has fueled my sense of urgency around addressing the problem that I call educational inequity, and that has drawn the passion of thousands of other talented leaders in our country, in the United States, and now here in Spain and all over the world. I hope the journey will provide lessons for those of you who are interested in ensuring that all children, regardless of the circumstances of their birth, have access to the kind of education that opens up a world of possibilities for them. And at the same time, in particular, I hope it provides useful lessons for young people who are passionate about making the world a better place. So, as I said, I came to this a little over maybe 22 years ago when I was a college student. I was a very concerned college student, concerned about the fact that our country, the United States of America, which aspires to be a place of equal opportunity, nonetheless tolerates the reality that where students are born in our country determines their educational prospects and life prospects. It's a huge problem in our country. 15 million children are living below the poverty line there, and they have an 8% chance of graduating from college, whereas the kids who are born in the top quartile of income have an 80% chance of graduating from college. So I was doing what college students do when they're focused on issues, organized a conference on it, working together with other college students and whatnot. And at the same time, as I came into my senior year in college, I knew I had to figure out what I would do after I graduated. And our generation was known at the time as the me generation. Supposedly, we just cared about ourselves. We just wanted to go make a lot of money. And as I considered my own future and talked with my friends and such, I just became overwhelmed with the sense that that label was misplaced. That the issue wasn't with the generation, but rather with the recruiters. So all of the people who were recruiting liberal arts graduates like myself were investment banks and management consulting firms asking us to commit 2 years to go, in our case, work on Wall Street, where you can make a lot of money. And one day I just thought of this idea, why aren't we being recruited as aggressively to commit 2 years to teach in our highest poverty communities? I thought that there would be an incredible power to that, both in the immediate term, because we would be channeling all this energy into classrooms in our neediest communities, and in the long term, because I thought, how powerful would it be to influence the priorities of a generation by having the real leaders in the generation teaching in urban and rural contexts rather than working in these banks. So that was the idea. I needed a thesis topic, and just as I progressed in writing this paper, became all the more obsessed with the idea. Now, several decades before, President Kennedy had launched something called the Peace Corps, and he had done this with 500 Corps members in the first year. So that became my plan. I thought, this has to happen. I'm going to make it happen, and developed a plan to, in the first year, inspire thousands of people to apply and train and place no fewer than 500 of them in communities across the United States. I calculated a budget saying that this would cost about $2.5 million. Turned in the paper to my thesis advisor, who called me up and asked me to his office and said, basically, as he's said to many people since, he said I was deranged. He said, do you know how hard it is to raise $2,500, let alone $2.5 million? But having the extraordinary asset of naivete and inexperience, his question sort of went in one ear and out the other. And about a year later, I was looking out on an auditorium full of the first 500 Teach for America Corps members, who in fact would start their training and begin teaching the following year. Now, that was the true beginning of this journey, because these 500 teachers who had been recruited on the top campuses all across the country had come to us with extraordinary idealism and commitment, but then they started teaching in schools in our country's highest poverty communities. And they watched students in their classes bring really inconceivable social challenges into their rooms, and realized that the schools were in no way set up to meet their extra needs. And honestly, for many of our teachers, survival became the mantra. I was able to learn, though, from some of those 500 teachers who stepped back and realized that the only way to be successful in this was to really change our definition of what it was to teach. I think about a teacher named Aurora Laura, who started teaching 4th grade in Houston, Texas, and realized that her 4th graders had come into her room essentially not, reading at a 1st grade level, writing sentences that did not have spaces between words. And she was outraged by this circumstance and determined that she would change that. So she stepped back and said, you know what, by the end of the year, all of my 4th graders are going to prove to everyone in this school that they can do 4th grade work and are ready to go into 5th grade on grade level. Everyone said she was crazy, but Aurora was just out of college. She was naive, she had the power of inexperience, and so their concerns went in one ear and out the other. And she persisted. She met with each of her kids and their parents. She explained to them where they were in their academics, but that it didn't have to be that way, and that if they worked with her and worked incredibly hard, they could get to the point by the end of the year that most 4th graders are at. She rewrote her whole curriculum. She put enormous amounts of energy into maximizing every second she had with her kids. She realized that wouldn't be enough, so she convinced the school principal to give her a key to the building so that she could keep the kids there late and bring them to school on Saturdays. And by the end of the year, her 4th graders proved that they could do 4th grade work. Every one of them passed the 4th grade test at the end of the year. They were writing beautiful 5-paragraph essays. Now, Aurora is a very rare person, and so many of our most successful teachers would realize that while they understood now that it is absolutely possible for kids who face all the extra challenges of poverty to excel when they're met with high expectations and have extra supports, they realized that thousands and thousands of teachers going above and beyond traditional expectations was not really the answer to this problem, because there were only so many Aurora Lauras in the world. And so some of these teachers said, you know what, we need to change the way schools are set up. I think about 3 guys, I believe one of them, Mike Feinberg, spoke here last year at this forum, who, when they were 24, actually they too were teaching in Houston, Texas. They had taught 5th graders to extraordinary success, much as Aurora had. And they watched their 5th graders go into middle schools in 6th grade that were not set up to meet their needs. And these 3 guys, Mike and Chris and Dave, decided, you know what, we're going to change this. We're going to go to the Houston Independent School District and ask them for some school buildings. The superintendent wasn't very responsive, and as Mike may have explained, finally he just decided to stand in the parking space of the superintendent and insist that if he was going to park his car there, he would give Mike a school building. So Mike and Dave and Chris really started a new kind of school. A school that set out with a mission to ensure that their students, low-income kids who, if they did not beat the odds, chances were 8 out of 100 of them would graduate from college. But these schools decided our mission is to ensure that all of our students graduate from college. So they took on a very, very ambitious goal, and then they went at reaching that goal with the same level of energy and discipline and using the same strategies that great leaders use to reach any ambitious goal. They built powerful cultures of achievement in their schools. They went to all lengths to recruit talented teams of people, and they went at that with in an incredibly determined way. They started the first 3 of what are now maybe 300 or 400 schools in urban and rural communities across the country that are attaining the kind of results that Aurora did in her classroom. These schools are literally changing the trajectory of their students. I was just in Atlanta, Georgia, where there are 5 KIPP schools, part of the network that Mike and Dave started. They take kids in at the 5th grade in the bottom third of performance based on the national norm assessments in the United States. And by 3 years later, when they're in 8th grade, they're in the top third of performance. Those are schools that are literally changing the life prospects of their students. In Houston, when Chris Barbick's Yes College Prep Network opens its 5th high school in 2014, it will graduate as many students as the entire public school system in Houston. Again, these are schools that are absolutely changing the trajectory of their students. So today, 20 years in, thanks to, we must remember, the power of inexperience and passionate commitment to making the world a better place. In the United States, today we know something we didn't know 20 years ago. We know that it is possible to provide kids who face the challenges of poverty with an education that is truly transformational for them, that gives them a path out of poverty. So now the question in our country is, can we do this at scale? Can we create whole school systems that provide a transformational education for kids? Well, a few years ago, about 5 years ago, the mayor in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., decided that the time had come for transformational change at a system level. Actually, this mayor was about 34 years old, and he looked at the fact that, that the educational outcomes in our nation's capital were the worst in the country. Literally, 4th graders in Washington, D.C. are not even at the 1st grade level. I mean, this is an absolute atrocity. So he says, I'm going to take over the school system, and despite a lot of political fallout, he takes the school system over, and he asks a woman who's a Teach for America alum, who's maybe not even 30 at the time, to manage the search for the person who would manage the school system. So this woman, Abigail Smith, spends 6 months looking for someone who would be a transformational leader for the Washington, D.C. school system. Finally, she realizes that this mayor is just crazy enough to let her suggest that Michelle Rhee should be the chancellor in Washington, D.C. Now, Michelle was 37 years old. She had no background in running school systems, but her background showed that she was, in fact, a transformational leader. When she was a Teach for America Corps member, she took a class of kids from the 13th percentile against the national norm to the 90th percentile. So Michelle Rhee becomes in charge of the Washington, D.C. public schools, and she surrounds herself with a team of other Teach for America alums and others who are committed to changing things in Washington, D.C. And they did change things. They came in and proposed a new union contract that would eliminate teacher tenure and enable teachers to make a lot of money if they actually produced student achievement results. Now, this was a radical idea, and they got their contract through. And I remember talking with a woman named Kaya Henderson, another Teach for America alum, who herself was probably 30 at the time, who was in charge of the union contract negotiations. Today, Kaya is the chancellor of the whole school system, but she said she met with people from lots of other school systems who looked at her and said, how in the world did you get this new union contract? And she just looked at them and said, I guess it was just because we didn't know it was impossible. We just said this is the way it needs to be, and we persisted, and it happened. Well, the Washington, D.C. schools, for many reasons, including the union contract, are today the fastest improving school system in the country. And many people in communities across the country, many thousands of Teach for America alumni, but thousands of others as well, are looking at the example of Washington, D.C. and asking themselves, how can we affect not just incremental change, because we need truly meaningful change for kids given the magnitude of the problem, but truly transformational change for our kids. And now, 20 years into this, I have the extraordinary privilege of meeting people not only in communities across the United States, but inspiring social entrepreneurs in countries around the world who themselves are determined to channel the energy of their nation's future leaders against the problem of educational inequity in their countries. I've gotten to spend the last 2 days with Javier Rogla, who's somewhere in this audience, who is, together with the support of many others in Spain, launching Empieza por Educar, or Teach for Spain, pardon my terrible Spanish, which is so exciting to see. So my last 20 years have been an incredible journey that have fueled my own sense of possibility about the solvability of this problem. And as I think about what the next 20 will hold, given what I'm discovering are the universals in this issue of education, I can just envision the day when we have truly unstoppable movements to ensure educational opportunity for all in the United States, but in literally dozens and dozens of other countries around the world, ultimately hundreds of countries that are inspiring each other and are accelerating each other's development by sharing lessons around the world. So just to close out, I wanted to reflect on the lessons held in this journey and just pull out a couple of thoughts. First, for those of you who think a lot about how to ensure educational opportunity for all students, you know, I think the most salient lessons of our journey thus far are, first of all, that we can solve this problem. I see evidence every day, and not only in the now hundreds of schools that are showing us what is possible, but in growing numbers of communities in our country. We still haven't moved the needle against the problem in an aggregate sense, but we are seeing whole communities effect meaningful change for kids at a system level. So they are showing us what is possible. And wherever we see truly transformational change for kids, always it's about extraordinary leadership. Aurora, as a teacher, engaged in an active leadership. She was an incredible leader. She said, here's where we're going to try to go. She got her kids and the kids' parents working with her. She progressed in a goal-oriented way. She did whatever it took to reach her goal. Mike and Dave and Chris and every school leader of hundreds of schools that I've seen affecting this kind of change did the same thing. Michelle and Kaya and others at a system level. And so that fuels my belief that if we can channel the energy of our world's future leaders against the problem of educational inequity, we can make an incredible difference. The second big thought to leave you with is directed at the young people in the room. And it's just to say that the world needs you before you gain lots of experience. You know, when I think about what has fueled the progress in Teach for America and now in the Teach for All network, it is so much about talented, determined, committed, passionate young people who don't yet know that it is impossible to solve this problem. So I encourage you to channel your energy against our world's biggest problems early. And as you can tell from my example, you know, when I heard Muhammad Yunus's speech accepting the Nobel Prize, and he said, you know what I've learned is that poverty is a solvable problem, it resonated so deeply. because what I've learned through my experience is that educational inequity is a solvable problem. The world's disparities are solvable. They are tough, though, and it takes a long time to solve them. So I hope you'll start early. To me, the only question is whether enough of our world's most promising future leaders will decide to channel their energy against our most pressing problems. Thank you so much.